So, what actually makes an action right or wrong? I mean, is it just your personal opinion? Maybe it's a cultural thing? Or is there some kind of objective, capital T truth to morality? Today, we're going to dive into three big philosophical views that try to answer that exact question. And you might be surprised how often we all rely on these ideas, maybe without even knowing their names. To get us started, let's not begin with some dusty old theory. Let's start with a real and frankly a very difficult story from our source material. In West London, a man named Abdallah Yonis killed his 16-year-old daughter, Heshu. He claimed he did it to, in his words, expunge a stain from his family, a stain he believed was caused by her becoming too westernized. And this leads us to the absolute core question for our entire discussion today. Was what he did morally wrong? I don't just mean wrong by your standards or my standards. I mean, was it just wrong? Objectively, fundamentally, no matter what anyone, anywhere believes. Your immediate gut reaction to that question, that's the perfect jumping off point for everything we're about to explore. All right, so let's begin with the idea that many of us, I think, start with. It seems like the simplest answer on the surface. Morality is just personal. You know, what's right for you is right for you, and what's right for me is right for me. End of story. Well, this idea actually has a formal name in philosophy. It's called subjective relativism. And the theory is pretty straightforward. An action becomes morally right simply because a person approves of it. There's no outside standard. The very act of you approving of something makes it right. You can see why it's an appealingly simple way to think about ethics, right? But when you really start to dig into what this theory implies, things get pretty weird pretty fast. First off, it would mean that you are morally infallible. Think about that. If morality is just what you approve of, you can never be wrong about a moral judgment. It also means that a single act, like that honor killing, can be both right and wrong at the exact same time. And, maybe the weirdest part, it makes real moral disagreement completely impossible. Let me show you what I mean. If subjectivism is true, when Maria says capital punishment is right, what she's really saying is, I approve of it. And when Carlos says it's wrong, he's just saying, I disapprove of it. See the problem? Both of them are just stating true facts about how they feel. They're not actually disagreeing with each other any more than if one said, I like vanilla ice cream, and the other said, I like chocolate. There's no conflict. It's just a statement of preference. Okay, so if that purely personal view of morality leads to some pretty big logical problems, what if we just zoom out a little? What if it's not the individual who gets to decide what's right and wrong, but the culture as a whole? And this brings us to our second big idea, cultural relativism. This is the view that an action is morally right if and only if one's culture approves of it. So morality isn't personal anymore. It's determined by the society you happen to live in. What's moral in ancient Greece is different from what's moral in modern-day Brazil. And according to this theory, that's really all there is to say about it. Now, the argument for cultural relativism usually follows a pretty simple three-step logic. Step one, people in different cultures have different ideas about right and wrong. I mean, that seems obviously true, right? Step two, because they disagree, then right and wrong must just be relative to culture. And that leads to the conclusion there are no objective moral truths that apply to everybody, everywhere. But wait a minute, is that argument really solid? The key move here, the one you gotta watch, is in that second step. Just because people or entire cultures disagree about something, does that automatically mean there's no objective truth of the matter? I mean, for centuries, different cultures disagreed about whether the Earth was flat or round. That disagreement didn't mean there wasn't a real answer. It just meant some of them were wrong. And just like we saw with subjectivism, when we really start to think through the consequences of cultural relativism being true, well, we run into some really surprising and frankly, deeply uncomfortable results. I mean, really think about this for a second. If a culture's approval is what makes something right, then that culture can never, ever be mistaken about morality. It's infallible by definition. And that means that social reformers, the people who fight against the system, are by definition acting immorally. And from there, it also means we can't ever legitimately criticize another culture's practices, and the whole idea of moral progress just goes right out the window. This is where the theory really starts to clash with our common sense, right? Under a strict reading of cultural relativism, moral heroes like Martin Luther King Jr., who fought against the approved norms of racial segregation in his day, were actually doing something immoral. Why? Because they were challenging their culture's accepted rules. This theory literally turns our moral heroes into the bad guys. And it just keeps going from there. If a culture can't be wrong, then it can never get morally better. the abolition of slavery, the fight for women's right to vote. Under cultural relativism, you can't call those examples of moral progress. They're just moral change. The new culture isn't better than the old one, it's just different. And for most of us, that just doesn't feel right. Okay, so far, the two theories we've looked at both assume that when we say something is wrong, we're making a claim about what is true. They just disagree on what makes it true, you or your culture. But what if moral statements aren't claims to truth at all? This is where our third theory, emotionalism, takes a really radical turn. Emotivism says, hey, when we say something like murder is wrong, we're not actually stating a fact that can be true or false. No. Instead, we're doing two things. One, we're expressing our personal feelings, like our disgust for murder, and two, we're trying to get other people to feel the same way we do. As the philosopher A.J. Ayer put it, a moral statement is just expressing a sentiment. So saying murder is wrong is basically the same as just standing up and shouting, boo, murder, or down with murder. You're not stating a fact, you're just venting an emotion. And as you might guess, this has its own wild set of implications. For one, it means there are no such things as moral facts. Nothing is ever really good or bad. It also means you can't be wrong about morality because, hey, you can't be wrong about your own feelings. But here's the big one. It seems to completely remove reason and logic from moral debates. If morality is just about feelings, what's the point of arguing with facts and evidence? It's just my feelings against yours. Okay, wow. We have been on quite a philosophical journey here, from the purely personal to the cultural and all the way to the purely emotional. So let's take a breath and just pull it all together to see what we found. All right, let's break it down one last time. We have subjective relativism, which bases morality on your personal approval. But the big problem there is it makes every single one of us morally perfect. Then there's cultural relativism, which bases it on what society says. But that makes things like moral progress and social reform totally impossible. And finally, we've got emotivism, which says morality is just an expression of feeling. But in doing so, it seems to say that moral facts don't even exist. Each of these very popular theories, when you really put them under the microscope, leads to conclusions that I think most of us find really, really hard to swallow. And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. If all these popular views, subjectivism, cultural relativism, and emotivism, if they all seem to fall apart under pressure, what does that mean for our search for moral truth? Does it force us to go back to that first idea? That maybe, just maybe, some things, like the honor killing of a teenage girl, are objectively wrong no matter what any one person or any one culture happens to believe? And that is the question we'll leave you with.